Hello, my name is Dr. Luke Bell. I'm lecturer in molecular horticulture at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. This is a screencast of material originally made available for the module Principles of Horticulture and Crop Production from the years 2020 to 2025. Please note that some of the details may now be outdated.
So the learning outcomes are to describe watermelon growth habit and appearance, explain the production and nutrition requirements of watermelon crops, describe the importance of flowering and pollination in developing fruits, explain how seedless watermelons were developed, and describe the post-harvest handling and storage requirements of watermelon. So the exact origins of watermelon crops is unknown, but it is known that they were cultivated as early as 2000 BCE in the Nile Valley in Egypt. And several theories have developed that the cultivated form of watermelon was derived from a wild relative, but it's unknown exactly what that wild relative is. So watermelon was introduced to Europe by the Moors in the 13th century, and it made its way quite prominently into artistic culture, as you can see in this picture of a painting from the Renaissance. It's quite a good illustration of how different cultivars of watermelon have developed over the centuries. So the species is called Citrullus lanatus, and the species is generally an annual plant. Its growth forms long trailing vines of about 5 to 6 meters in length. Most cultivars have a rooting depth of around about 60 centimeters, so quite deep rooting. And the leaves are generally large and lobed, around about 50 to 20 centimeters long. The flowers of watermelon are quite small and yellow, around about 2 to 5 centimeters in diameter. And flowers, like we've seen in melons and in cucumbers, only open for a single day. So watermelon seeds are usually flat and smooth and have a variety of colours, ranging from white, tan, green, red, or even black. And large cultivated fruits can contain up to 500 seeds in a single fruit. So this slide just kind of illustrates the diversity of the different genotypes and cultivars of watermelon in the world. So they generally have a large diversity both in shape, size and colour, and typically range from about 1 to 11 kilograms. But some cultivated varieties which are entered into competitions, for example, can grow as large as 60 kilograms, so really large fruits. Commercial markets tend to prefer the smaller fruits as they are easier to handle post-harvest. The rind thickness, so that's the thickness of the outer layer of skin, can range from about 1 to 4 centimeters, and as well as varying in all of those different size and shape and color traits, they also have variability in taste and flavor properties too. In terms of uses, obviously the fruits themselves are typically grown for the soft inner flesh, which is known as the pericarp, and this is consumed generally as a kind of dessert fruit. However, watermelon seeds are popular snacks and can be bought in packets in places such as Asia and the Middle East. In terms of production, watermelon is a warm season crop which is sensitive to frost, and as such it can't be grown outdoors in the UK. So the growing season is usually 75 to 120 days long, and optimum cultivation temperature is usually about 32 degrees C in the day and 20 degrees C at night. And F1 hybrids have been developed that are more uniform and productive, but generally the seed for these F1 hybrids is much more expensive. In terms of field conditions, watermelon grows best on sandy loams which are well drained. Plants can be grown in raised beds which are about 15 to 20 centimeters above the furrow depth, and this facilitates that drainage. But the space between the beds can actually be quite wide, so around about 2 meters. Watermelons can be grown on a plastic mulch, which helps keep the soil warm and improves yields. Crops can be grown by both direct seeding or raising via transplants. Drip irrigation and fertigation can improve water efficiency in dry seasons in dry arid countries, and this promotes better root development and formation. So in terms of irrigation, despite their deep rooting systems, the crops still require some additional irrigation usually, and this can be between about 400 to 700 millimeters of water depending on the season and also depending on the soil type. So sandy soils will require more irrigation and higher fertilizer rates than loamy soils, as the nutrients will tend to be drained out and leached out quite quickly. So nitrogen and phosphorus are the nutrients most often required for watermelon crops. Phosphorus is needed for good seedling development and development of fruit quality. Potassium increases the rind thickness and cracking resistance, so a thin rind will give the fruits a higher likelihood of cracking post-harvest. Watermelons remove a large amount of nutrition from the soil, so similar to melon crops. So then that might need to be input back into the soils after the harvest. And the plants grow most ideally at a pH of around 6 to 6.5. So fertilizers of watermelon can be applied as a liquid or granular feed. And these are just a few of the general nutrition requirements of a crop, and it can vary, again, as I said, according to the soil type. It's important to maintain good leaf growth for maximum productivity, so the plants need to be able to photosynthesize at a high rate so that the fruits can develop to a large size. And they also benefit from addition of relatively minor nutrients such as sulfur, calcium, magnesium, boron, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum and zinc. So seeds are generally planted about 2 to 4 centimeters deep into the soil. The optimal germination range is 25 to 35 degrees centigrade, and seedlings will generally emerge after about 1 week. Germination is typically poor and slow at temperatures below 20 degrees C, and it may take up to 2 weeks for the seeds to germinate if they're sown in such conditions. So once the plants start growing, the vines spread very rapidly, and spacing ranges between 2.5 to 5 centimeters within a row, but as I said before, it could be up to 2 or 3 meters between the row, and that's to facilitate the sprawling growth of the vines, but also the harvesting of the watermelons when they ripen. So cultivars with long vines require the wider spacing, and closer spacing produces smaller fruit, and wider spacing produces larger fruit. So field populations can therefore range anywhere from about 3,200 to 8,000 plants per hectare, so quite a broad range. So as with the previous two cucurbit crops we've looked at, flowering and pollination of watermelon is critical for a good production. So most cultivars are monoecious, so they have both separate male and female flowers, so that requires cross-pollination by bees. Once pollinated, the flowers quickly enlarge and start to produce the watermelon. So vines can support up to two to three fruits per vine, and like melon, the watermelon will have an inhibitory effect on the flowering and seed set on that same vine. So only a certain number of vines can produce a certain amount of fruit. Sometimes thinning is performed in order to improve the fruit size, so some plants might be taken out or some vines might be cut off in order to increase the size or optimize the size of watermelons. So seedless watermelons have actually been produced, so they lack the typical black seeds which are found inside the flesh, and these were developed in the 1950s in Japan. So without going into too much detail about the genetics, a variety of watermelon which has 4 copies of each chromosome, so this is called tetraploid, is crossed with a diploid watermelon which only contains 2 copies of every chromosome within its cells. So that resulting offspring therefore produces has a result of having a 3N, so that's a triploid watermelon, which is infertile, so it only contains 3 copies of each chromosome. So therefore, because the plant is infertile, it can't produce any seeds. However, it still requires pollination by insects in order to initiate the fruit and development response. So within a production, pollen donors are required to be planted alongside the sterile plants. And these can be between 12 and 18% of the total field population, and that's to initiate that the development of fruits. So the triploid seeds, the infertile seeds, are typically germinate very, very poorly, so they're sold at a premium and at a higher price. They also lack the vigor of F1 hybrid varieties and are usually transplanted out into a field or grown in a glasshouse. So seeds are typically germinated at about 32 degrees C and then grown on and hardened off at a slightly colder temperature of around about 22 to 23 degrees C before being transplanted. So in terms of harvesting, unlike melon cultivars, watermelons do not detach or upsize from the vine once they've ripened, and they must be harvested manually and their maturity assessed visually. So watermelons cannot ripen off the vine, so they have to be ripened while still attached to the plant. So the way the fruits are assessed is obviously by looking at its size, shape and colour, but also by tapping the fruits, so that the fruits will make a kind of thumping hollow sound when they're ripe, and so that tells the person harvesting that they're ready to be cut off the plant. So post-harvest, watermelons are vulnerable to cracking and should not be stacked end to end, as this will increase the likelihood of them splitting and putting unnecessary weight on the ends of the fruits. So rind thickness is, as I've said before, quite important in preventing this cracking. So fruit should generally be cooled and stored between 13 to 16 degrees centigrade. But they're not suited for long-term storage and can last around about 2 to 3 weeks if the humidity is kept around about 80%. So extended storage can be achieved at lower than 10 degrees centigrade. However, this runs the risk of inducing chilling injury in the fruits. So whole and pre-cut watermelons have seen increases in popularity in the recent times, and in Japan they've diversified the market, and watermelons are sold in many unusual molded shapes, which is achieved by growing the plants inside a plastic mold, or putting the fruits inside a plastic mold, so they can be developed into a kind of square shape or triangular shape, for example. But there's also a whole art form around carving of watermelons which has arisen, and in this slide you can see a watermelon which has been carved and the outer layers have been peeled away to achieve these differences in colour. So in summary, watermelon cultivars are diverse in their appearance and uses. Crops have a high nutrition requirement and require some irrigation in order to produce high quality fruit. Crops are grown best in hot to warm climates and are sensitive to cold temperatures post-harvest. Flowers only open for a single day, so it's important that pollinators are present continuously throughout flowering in order to fertilise the plants. Seedless watermelons are available and are sold at a higher price, but do not grow and perform as well in the field as their F1 hybrid equivalents. China is the world's largest producer of watermelons, but other Asian and African countries with hot climates have significant cultivation areas too.